One of the difficulties, though, and I think it's good for us to just be honest up front with this discussion, is that many Christians, we look at the historical books, we look at the plan of redemption, and we see the glory, but we also see that there's so much violence that's depicted. For instance, and you talk about this in detail in your book, at the end of the book of Judges, we have this incredibly grotesque story that ends this downward spiral that we see throughout the book. So, as a professor, I'm going to do something that not many students get to do, but I'm going to ask one of your questions back to you, Dr. Vaillancourt. What lessons, as we frame the end of the book of Judges, what lessons can be drawn from the grotesque sexual assault and grisly conclusions to the story of the Levite and his concubine there at the end of the book of Judges?
Yeah. So thanks, Tim. And since you're not one of my students, I can't fail you for being saucy, you know? That's my joke. Anyway,
Good.
it's a heavy story, isn't it? And
It is. Yeah.
it's, it's the whole dare to be a David approach to reading the Old Testament breaks down when we, read a story like this. This isn't, this is what you should do, kind of model this. In fact, the author of the book of Judges says nothing like this had ever been seen in Israel. So when we recoil at the horrendous nature of this grotesque sexual assault that this woman endures, and then this after she dies, the grisly actions that she's cut in 12, her corpse is cut in 12 pieces and FedExed to across Israel. And what in the world is going on? Like this would be rated MA by Netflix. And here it's in the Bible. Should we be reading this? But some of the lessons drawn, like in that story, the Levite and his concubine, first of all, there's a downward spiral in Judges. There's this theme of a downward spiral. And I talk about it in the chapter on Judges. And you see that early on there's evil, but as the story goes on, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so the end of the book of Judges is this climax of evil. And so this is not going well for God's people. And when you read stories like Judges through the lens of Deuteronomy 28, blessings for covenant keeping, curses for covenant breaking, and then Deuteronomy 31-10, restoration for covenant repentance. We see the blessings in Joshua of Israel having the land as their own, blessings for covenant keeping. But when we see the horrible sin of God's people in Judges, there's this nagging sense like, how long is it going to take before, if you fill a cup with a trickle, eventually it does fill up. And how long is it going to be before the wrath of God is filled up to overflowing on his people and these curses for covenant breaking come on them? And thankfully it doesn't happen yet. The spoiler alert is that's in the book of Kings, but it's pretty horrendous. And with the Levite and his concubine, should we go to Jebus, which at the time was not inhabited by Israelites? And they say, no, let's go to Gibeah because that's an Israelite stronghold. And when they go there, the men of the city surround the house and say, send that man out because we want to have sex with him. The stories in the Old Testament rhyme? Does that sound like another story in the Old Testament? That sounds like Sodom and Gomorrah. And the men of the city surround the house and want to rape. Is it Lot, right? And so something is similar is happening. And instead, the man sends his concubine out and she's raped all night. And then in the morning, she's dead on the front step. So it is a horrible story. But the message, when we read that story in light of Sodom, the message is this Israelite city has become like Sodom. Like that's how bad the sin of God's people has gotten, that Israel has become Sodom, which God destroyed in the book of Genesis because of their sin. And so that's one lesson. And the second lesson, when we read, she's cut in 12 and FedExed across the land. Those parts aren't just sent, but they're sent to each of the 12 tribes. Like each of the 12 tribes receive a package with part of her corpse in it. And when we read that in light of the laws in the Pentateuch, touching a dead corpse made someone unclean. And by sending that, it's a symbolic way of saying the entire land of Israel has become unclean, unfit for entering the presence of Yahweh in worship. And so those are two of the lessons we can draw from it. They're not happy lessons. They're not like, oh, I just feel so upbuilt here. They're heavy lessons about this is how bad sin was getting in Israel. And they're kind of a warning to us, let it not be so kind of thing.
Yeah, as I look at it, Dr. Vaillancourt, I think of it in terms of God not letting the people of Israel get away with downplaying the severity of their sin.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, I think about it in our lives, we're able to, in many cases, turn a blind eye to most of the sin that's happening around us. We know that abuse is real. We know that there are grotesque things that happen. But generally speaking, I can drive down the road and I can go to my home and I can close the door and I can turn my mind off to the sin that constantly surrounds. But God
Hmm.
doesn't have that option. God sees the full brokenness of the world. And at least for me, as I look at that story, I think it's God pressing upon us that even his chosen people, and especially his chosen people who had all of the advantages of his grace, they fall into the same level of sin. I don't think it's incidental. You have a Levite. I don't think it's incidental, as you said, that you have the 12 tribes. It is in a sense God showing us the
Hmm.
severity of sin. But then on the other side, that helps us to see the glory of his grace, that God
Yeah.
did
Amen.
not destroy those people. And as you said in the book of Kings, the culmination of their sin is they were even worse than the nations that they had driven out. And yet,
Hmm.
as we're gonna end the interview in a little while, there's hope. There's hope in the midst of that depravity that God is still at work. So